Okay, so first slide. This is a look at, can you hear me okay? Yeah? All right, so this is a look at the fund balances of all of the districts on the peninsula through ESD 114. And there in yellow is, of course, our district. And we really want to point out just the decrease in fund balance for 2 years in a row and how that compares to some of those other districts. Here you can see it just kind of goes across for ending fund balances in 17, 18, all the way to last year, ending in last year at our 4 million, which I just shared with you in our report. So that's a total of 7.6% of our overall operating expenses. And you can see how that really, how that differs from the rest of the districts on the peninsula. Their fund balances are quite a bit heftier than ours, and there's a reason for that. Mr. Brewer?
Yeah, so I think the key takeaways here are obviously anytime you lose enrollment, it has a significant impact to your bottom line. And over the course of the last 2 years, we have lost the better part of about 215 students. Now, our slow erosion of loss started actually before COVID. So loss of enrollment impacts districts fairly significantly. Now, as Kira referenced, for 2 consecutive years, our district has dipped into fund balance in the form of somewhere between $1.3 and $1.4 million. And that comes by way of two reasons. One, our priority the last couple of years, in particular last year, was bringing students back early into in-person learning. If you remember last year, we started bringing back SPED students mid-September, and on October 5th, we brought back kindergartners, and we kept building from there. Our secondary students came back then at semester time. And I think the date was January 29th and February 5th, if I remember right. So that's much earlier than many of our peers in this area. Now, Clallam County was a little bit of an exception. Forks and Crescent and Swim and PA, we really led the initiative of bringing students back early. Okay? Kitsap County, Mason County, not so much. And so we all know from our experience last year that when you're operating a hybrid model, it was incredibly expensive because we were running buses, sometimes 4 times a day. And we had very minimal support last year based on the ridership around funding for transportation. So simply put, our district is going to experience potentially more regression in a fund balance when you make the priority of returning students to school, and that's a more expensive model to operate. Many of the schools that you see, and many of the schools across the state of Washington, did not return to school until April 19th of last year, and that's when the governor ordered schools to be back in session. We were months ahead of that. And it comes at a cost. And so you will see a regression of enrollment, or excuse me, a regression of ending fund balance. The second piece that really impacted our fund balance last year was we made a conscious choice. When I say we, board, superintendent, we made a conscious choice to not lay anybody off. And there were many districts in our region and beyond that laid staff off when they were in a remote setting. We didn't do that. Why? One, we thought last September that we wanted our kids back in school, and 2, we really knew that it wasn't the right time and place. In the middle of a pandemic wasn't the time nor the place to reduce staff, okay, and lay people off. So those two pieces come at a more premium cost than you might see with some other school districts that maybe added to fund balance over the last couple of years. We haven't been able to do that.
Next slide. So one of the challenges, one of the issues that we have with a declining fund balance is cash flow. So you can see, and this is a slide you guys are pretty familiar with. We look at this every month. As we move through the year with our apportionment and our revenue payments, we're paid at a different amount every year. And I know I've shared this with you for off and on throughout over the last few years, but as you can see, the black line, that's last year. We started the year at 4.7 million. We get different percentages of our apportionment from the state, and it fluctuates based on our tax payments. So when we receive our October and our April tax payments, and then it dips down. And you remember last June when we dipped all the way down to 1.5 million? Yeah. So that's that is really that's the end of the federal fiscal year, and so they kind of want to hold on to as much of their funds before July, so their percentage is lower in June. So that really puts us in a tough spot as far as making sure we have enough money to pay those bills. We have to watch that we have that. So a fund balance itself isn't a savings account. It's a way to pay bills. So we really have to watch that and watch that cash flow. And so making sure that we have a fund balance and enough to pay those bills is crucial.
And I'm going to add a little to that. So just drawing a connection to last year and this year. So the black line represents last year's fund balance, month to month. And at the beginning of the year, the lines are off a little bit, but that black dot, the first black dot in September there represents $4.8 million. That was our starting point last year. This year, our starting point is $4 million. So you can just run the math, okay? If we don't pay attention to our fund balance now, it will be too late 10 months from now. Because if we set at a $4.8 million fund balance in September of last year, and we were at 1.5 in June, you can do the math.
Yep.
And that puts us at, somewhere around $700,000 to $800,000 in June if we don't pay attention to it now. So I'm challenging the board tonight to, pay attention to that, and let's start to work to resolve our fund balance issues before it becomes a point where we can't recover. But we have a solution. So last year during the budget planning cycle, we estimated enrollment at 3,235 students. And remember, our conversation last spring, we talked about setting that very low. In fact, that 3,235 students represented a number less than what our average was last year. But we wanted to, rather than spend the whole year trying to catch up, we wanted to start with the low point and at least have a number to work off of, so we're not working month to month to play catch up with fund balance. So I think it was a wise decision of the board to set that at 3,235 students, even though we figured we were going to start with more students than that this year. Our actual enrollment, our average right now is 3,402. Now, that's it's not final. It doesn't become final until June. Okay, it's a 10-month average. So right now, the good news is we have 167 students more than we budgeted. It's great news. There are districts across our state that don't have an increase in enrollment this year, which creates another significant challenge. So that's really good news for the Port Angeles School District. Those 167 students represent about approximately $1.4 billion in apportionment that we stand to gain based on that average if it maintains. So what do we do with that? I think it's really, really important, as we just spoke about fund balance, that we start to address our fund balance issue with the additional apportionment that's come to our district, that will come to our district by way of the additional enrollment. Now, it just works out, if you look at the last 2 years, to maintain our commitment to students and to staff, we've spent between 1.3 and 1.4 of our fund balance. Just happens to work out that that's about what we look to gain this year by our increase. So, when I recommend tonight, I'm going to recommend that the board makes a commitment tonight to replace that fund balance that we've lost the last 2 years, to maintain that commitment to staff and to students. The next slide here references, references the importance of the ESSER funds. You can see that by year, the gray year is 2018-19, and then you can see the first line is enrollment, then you have certificated instructional staff, and then you have classified staff. If you note, in 2018-19, we had 3,548 students. At that time, we had 248 instructional staff and 170 classified staff. So you can see how that plays out in the remaining 3 years. Pre-COVID, the 19-20 school year, we had 3,520 students. We had 244 instructional staff, and we had 160 classified staff. Today, which is looks like a yellow kind of tone, we have 3,402 students, as you note, which is about 116 less of what we had pre-COVID. But the kicker here is we have more instructional staff than we had pre-COVID with more students, and we have more classified staff than we had pre-COVID with more students. Now, that number does not include the classified staff, does not include the 5.67 positions that are currently posted that we haven't been able to fill just yet. As a superintendent, this makes me a little bit nervous, I'll be honest, because we can't sustain, okay? So this tells the picture to all of us that without the ESSER funds, this is not possible. And so maintaining that commitment to staff and to students now to help with, as you listen to Franklin tonight and you listen to the CSIPs tonight, that incredible need in our schools, we have to invest in it now. And using the ESSER funds to keep our staff high, class size low, and program supports for students is incredible. But we have to all know in this room now tonight that we can't sustain that. Without the ESSER funds, a lot of these supports will need to go away.
Okay, so a little bit more about ESSER. And this slide talks about all of our ESSERs, the ESSER funds that we've received. We received ESSER 1 back right after we started hearing word of it, right, during the pandemic, during the beginning. So we started collecting those funds at the end of 1920 and then into the beginning of last year. ESSER 1 was a little bit different. We were able to collect that, most of the 1.1 million was collected on lost revenue. That was a claim. Instead of us spending money to get the money, we actually just claimed the lost revenue. So all of that was fully claimed last year. And then moving into ESSER 2, we used a lot of ESSER 2 based on the ESSER guidelines to offset some of our expenses that we had to not dip too far into our fund balance. So here we've just, we had that full allocation of 4.8 million. The district receives indirects. We take indirects on all of our grants. An indirect is it's not a direct expense, so it helps pay to process anything in business services, to process the claims, to keep the lights on, to keep, there's just anything that's not a direct expense that it's based on the percentage that the feds actually give us. They give us that indirect percentage based on our a lot of different things, our spending. And so they look at, they tell us how much they feel that we would need in indirects, and we use that percentage to offset some of those expenses. So that's a piece of the grant that we don't plan to spend. We just receive those in reimbursements.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah. So going into the beginning of last year, then we were at 4 million. We spent a total of 1.6, just over 1.6 million in 2021, leaving us with 2.4 moving into the 2021 school year. We planned on, this is really how we balanced the budget this year, is we planned on those key positions that we know that we were going to need moving into this year. We didn't, based on our enrollment, we didn't want to let go of those critical positions like counselors and nurses and those positions that the state doesn't fully fund us at. So we kept those contracts whole with ESSER 2. And that was something we talked about in the budget process, and we made that decision as we moved through budget. So that total was 1.7 for salary and benefits. We knew that we were going to need tents for bad weather, for the kids to be able to eat outside, for different things to go on, continue teaching outside. So those tents are here, and they're being put up out around the district. But those were expensive, $120,000, because they needed to be really big, sturdy tents that I budgeted another $200,000 for anticipated extra staffing costs for professional development, just anything that might come up that we needed those funds for. And then, of course, our Chromebooks, our next round of our 5-year plan to replace those Chromebooks. So that's also in that. So you can also see I broke down in 2021 our exact ESSER costs of how we So our different ESSER costs, we had $428,000 in related bargaining costs, our nurses and counselors, some of our administrative costs, classroom supplies, maintenance, and then last year's Chromebook replacement was of the $405. So that's a breakdown of the 2021 expenses, just in case you're wondering exactly what we spent our ESSER 2 dollars on. Okay, so now moving into ESSER 3. We have a very specific plan of how we are going to spend ESSER 3. Here you can see we have a total of $9.8 million, and we have until 2024 to spend these funds. Indirects of 1.3, that's a total of 8.5 million. We budgeted half for this year and half for next year of that 8.5 million. So for this year, for the 4.2, there's very specific things that we have been directed by the state that we can spend those funds on. So Jenny, next slide. The objectives of the grant, obviously, safely keep schools open and sustain a safe operation for students and staff, address the learning loss and the impact of the pandemic. So there is one different requirement about ESSER 3 that there hasn't been in ESSER 1 or ESSER 2. And that's we have to spend 20% of those funds to address student learning loss for recovery and acceleration. Obviously, our plan is, we're spending probably 90% of it on that, so our plan is to spend more. But these are the allowable activities under ESSER 3. You can see those listed there, and those come right out of the form package that we submitted and that we attested that we would spend these dollars on.
So the next slide references what the proposed plan is this evening for you to adopt around the $4.2 million of ESSER 3 funds. So what I've outlined to our building leaders and other employee groups that these funds are really to be allocated to meet the demand and the need within our schools this year and next year around extra staffing, supplies, materials, etc. So we're asking that building leadership teams, which include principals, teachers, classified staff, and I've asked for parent rep to be on those as well. They come up with a plan. Because for us at the board level, or for me at the superintendent level, to determine what's the best strategy to address learning loss in our schools, I'm not the most apt to be able to do that. But these leadership teams that operate, that built the CSIPs that you've approved the last 2 meetings, they know the need. And so we've really challenged each of our building leadership teams to come up with, what do you need? And you heard a lot of references to the needs tonight during the CSIP presentations. So what's come to us at this point in time that we have approved is, one, we replaced the high poverty LAP dollars. So high poverty LAP dollars is a significant amount of funds that goes to primarily our elementary schools, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for some of our elementary schools. And so what ends up happening is when your enrollment goes down, your high poverty LAP goes down. So we've used some of the ESSER funds to backfill that to make their high poverty LAP whole this year. We've also allocated some resources to materials, supplies, and operating cost funds for just the supplies and materials in our schools. Those 2 first line items add up to approximately $500,000. We plan on paying, and we haven't reached agreement with all of our bargaining groups just yet, but we plan on paying COVID leave for staff, which will come at a cost, which I think is the fair thing to do for our employees that are working so hard for us this year in the middle of a pandemic. We have tentatively approved a family navigator ban. What's ended up happening is we do have bans, but that's taken away from other transportation needs. And so, as you saw on the previous slide, support of mental health services and navigator would fall under that. So that would be an allowable expense. An elementary track for outside PE. We're pushing PE outside this year. And so we do have one elementary school that doesn't have a track. And so tentatively approved that. We have approved 7 elementary teachers. Now, the slide I shared with you earlier with regards to staffing, none of that, this page is not included in that. So this is in addition to what you saw as far as our staffing pre and post COVID, or pre and within COVID. So we have approved 7 elementary teachers to help with additional supports in math and reading, 2 elementary teachers to support lower class sizes, and you heard that tonight in the CSIPs, 2 elementary teachers to support wellness rooms, 2 secondary math teachers to support additional help in mathematics, 2 secondary behavior support specialists, and currently 7 elementary paras for instructional support. And so that starts to address some of that $4.2 million that we have for ESSER 2 funds. So looking forward, and what I'm really bringing to you tonight is for your consideration is the goals that I have, and we'll see whether you agree with this or not, is 1, I think we take the apportionment that is in the form of today about $1.4 million, and we plan to replace those dollars that we've allocated above revenue the last 2 consecutive years. I think we use the ESSER 3 funds to sustain and enhance educational program, as I just referenced on the previous slide. And we keep class sizes low. And so you can see, and every class size is a little bit different. These are averages, okay? And so if you take a look, you can see that we've made a really conscious effort this year to keep our class sizes low to help address the number of issues that are occurring, you know, in any given class in our school district. Because if you, and Mary, you've been a teacher, I mean, class size matters when you have high needs. And this year, we have a lot of students with high needs. And so those would be the goals that I would ask you for consideration this evening. Questions?
Well, I have more of a comment. I have been sitting here silent since I heard the reports of the elementary buildings. I am alarmed, and I had no idea that we had the mental health, behavior problems, the counseling needs that I saw on each of those C6 tonight, and the low scores of students who will be dramatic all through our system if it's not corrected and remediated now in elementary. We know that by 3rd grade, if we have not remediated students, it's not likely that they will catch up. And these ESSER funds are speaking to a specific need, and I saw tonight that it is our need. And so I just, this could not have come at a better time when we clearly saw dramatic losses for our early childhood. And we cannot, I have had great pride in our schools' ability to bring students that are low poverty up to high achieving students. That has been our expectation in this district. I do not see that happening without supports like small class size. And I know these sizes are way under what have been negotiated. I mean, I was a teacher with large class sizes and always wished I could have numbers like this. But even as a negotiating item, I know that we expect a range higher than this. But right now, we need this if we're going to reach those students. So I don't really have a question, but I had an urgency to make a comment about that, because now is the time to use these funds that have been designated for student catch-up remediation. The need is very clear right now. So I just wanted to make that statement.
I'd like to ask you, Marty, since this is an action item, we are going to vote on this tonight.
Yes, I would appreciate that.
All right. So could we have a motion and then discussion?
I would love to move this, that we accept this, that we approve the PASD ESSER financial update and plan.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve this plan. Any discussion?
I know that when when I first came on, Marty sat me down with Kara and told me about, the general fund balance. I think at the time it was 5.4 or something like that, which Marty specifically told me was what we need to run the school for a month about.
Right.
And I thought that was a great number. We have 30 days if all goes wrong to keep all of our bills paid and keep the school running. And in the last 2 years, we've been running less than that. And if you look at us compared to other districts that are gaining, like even Cape Flattery is gaining $1 million a year. That's my alma mater. They're gaining $1 million a year over the last 3 years, and we're decreasing by almost that much. And it's a little alarming to think that we would be that in June we'd be under $1 million in our general fund. So I think the budget that we created with enrollment beginning of the year is going to work in our favor, and we should capitalize on that.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think this plan looks really good. This is, I agree with you, Mary, it's a once in a lifetime so far. Let's hope the pandemic someday goes away. But it's a really once in a lifetime recognition by a lot of people that we can't let this happen to our children. We must address it now. We have to. morally and every other way, we have got to get this taken care of. And I'm very thankful also for these ESSER funds. You know, sometimes federal funds are so apportioned in such a strange way that you can't spend them in the way you need to spend them. I also want to compliment you, Marty, of going to those learning teams in each school, because you're right, if anybody knows what they need, they know what they need. And it looks good to me. I'm very pleased with it, and I like putting that 1.4 back into our fund balance, because I get very nervous when it's not up to what it's supposed to be.
And many of us have still the PTSD of when the legislature cut our funding in the middle of the year. And I'm never going to get over that. If I have a chance to protect some money, I'm absolutely going to be for that when we're doing the right things for our kids on top of it. Because, yeah, this ESSER fund, they're going to give it to us, but what if they decide they're not? Because they've done that. And I don't want to be on, I want to be on the more conservative edge of that. So we can use this, parse it out through the years to make sure we're getting those kids back up to scratch.
And that leaves us 4.2 for 22, 23.
Yeah, that is true. We can budget 4.2 of ESSER $3 for next budget cycle. It's not going to go as far because this year we're using 2.4 of the ESSER 2. And so, you know, it's going to be more challenging next year. Still a lot of money, but there's going to be more challenges with that because we don't have the ESSER 2 funds to start with.
Hopefully, we have made enough progress this year with the ESSER 2 funds, and that the students have begun to recover. I mean, this is just me hoping that we have less recovery to do in the following year. So.
I also know the unpredictability of populations, and things are hard here. People are hard hit, find homes. There's a lot of factors that influence our student enrollment. And I think that that's another factor that we can't predict.
Although I'm very thankful we did get, what, 167 back?
Yeah.
I'm shocked to tell you the truth, and I'm very glad. And I was interested, and I am continuing to be interested in following those children that leave us.
And the one thing about the return of enrollment, if you really look deeper within the numbers, we have approximately 100 students in Seaview that are out of district. So that's been a net gain for our district. So really, in theory, the students that I'm going to make a generalization, and it's not perfect, but, sorry. So really, with 100 students, give or take, coming from out of district that are new to us, and having 167 new students to our district, our students that left because of COVID haven't really returned yet, to, even a 50% at this point in time. So you're right, Mary, where that goes from here, we don't know. Seaview has been a saving grace for us to bring in additional revenue to offset some of our revenue versus expenditure issues. Now, I'm going to say one more thing, that within the next 6 months or so, this board is going to, when you're looking at that cash flow issue, and we have a policy that defines 4% of expenditures as a minimum fund balance, which Kara references $2.1 million. I can't see a time when our end of year fund balance can set at $2.1 million and we can make bills in, April, May, or June. So we're going to have a serious conversation around what does a minimum fund balance look like that's considered healthy for this community and the school community based on data. So we're going to have to look at that. That's policy driven, in my opinion, over the next 6 months or so.
Any other discussion? No,
that being that it's from our building leadership teams, it feels like it's the right thing to do. So,
Well,
I
a part,
think, the comment I'd like to make with that is that the teachers are giving the input to them about what their needs are. And I heard a loud cry through a teacher's voice about the difficulties they're having with instruction because of the behavior and the emotional, and that's not something we've ever had to deal with to this. This is new territory.
and, yeah, I lost my train of thought, I apologize.
that's right. All I was saying is that I support this because I appreciate that you have taken the leadership team's input, and I think that, you know, hearing from them directly is what I need in order to support this. So that's what I was trying to say. So thank you for doing that.
I agree.
I also think increasing staff size, adding teachers, and support staff, emotional as well as just as paras for education, and certificated staff. All of that is going to help relieve the challenging burden that teachers are facing right now as well. Because I know it's hard in the classroom. I know it's hard in the schools. It's been awkward and difficult and scary for a year, 2 years now. And so having more hands at the task should make this easier on them as well.
Anybody want to call a question?
I'll call the question.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we approve our school system's ESSER 3, ESSER funds, not just 3, it's financial update. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Abstentions? Okay, passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Where do you go? Thank you, Carol. All right.